Good Saturday morning, everyone. Today on Perspectives, the holidays, they have arrived. COVID restrictions have been reduced, and some of you are traveling home and elsewhere to be with family. Now, that, of course, that's a tremendous improvement on what we as a nation had to endure last year. But the unspoken grief of missing loved ones, family, and friends who we lost to the COVID pandemic remains. Dealing with that emotional loss was made even worse because too many families were not allowed into the hospital rooms as their loved ones lost their final battle to this insidious virus. Too many Americans were unable to say goodbye in the hospital room, and for many families, funeral and memorial services were canceled or postponed due to the feared transmission of COVID-19. For too many Americans, they felt that they were not properly allowed to mourn or give respect to those who succumbed to the COVID pandemic. Now, as of this year, we're finally beginning to return to the ability to be with family and friends, even though the danger of the pandemic is far from over. You may remember several months ago, the President, Vice President Kamala Harris, and their spouses led the nation in a solemn ceremony in memory of the people who have lost their lives to COVID-19. It included a moment of silence, and 500 candles were lit honoring the more than 500,000 lives lost to the virus in the United States.
We have to resist becoming numb to the sorrow. Remember those we lost and those who left behind. We often hear people described as ordinary Americans. There's no such thing. There's nothing ordinary about them. The people we lost were extraordinary.
Sadly, the 500,000 mark of those who died when that ceremony happened back in February has only grown in number. Now, more than 760,000 Americans have died from COVID since early 2020. The grief process continues as families and friends prepare for the Thanksgiving and holiday gatherings. Their loss will be keenly felt, and mental health therapists say there is help for those who grieve. Our guests this morning are Shantay Jenkins, a mental health therapist. We'll also talk with Dr. Mark Wyatt, a retired pastor and now counselor in hospice and grief counseling. For those of you watching this morning who have lost loved ones to the pandemic, our hearts and prayers are with you. Please stay tuned to Perspectives in hopes that what we discussed today can offer some comfort in a time when we celebrate the family and the future. Perspectives continues after this quick break. Our first guest this morning, Ms. Shantay Jenkins. She is a mental health therapist. And this morning, we're sort of talking about some of the things that hopefully will be of help for folk who are dealing with grief during this upcoming holiday season, Ms. Jenkins. And, you know, during this last several months, we're talking a year and a half, 2 years for some people as relates to dealing with COVID-19. We've had a lot of deaths in both the state of Alabama as well as around the country. And we're talking about in Mobile County alone, over nearly 1,400 deaths and nearly 74,000 cases of COVID-19. So for all of us, probably myself, of course, and you included, knew someone who we've lost, who we won't be celebrating the holidays with this year. So we want to talk about some things as far as how folks can cope, handle it, and work towards moving beyond that this morning. Let's talk about dealing with that. How many people do you think are dealing with that now this time of the year? Because we hear about this a lot every holiday season, that people are dealing with some times where it's not as happy as the Hollywood industry and TV and the movies may want you to think it is.
Yes, there is a lot of people dealing with it. We've noticed an increase. I mean, mental health issues are on the rise, especially since COVID, since the pandemic. And so there are a lot of people that were dealing with grief before COVID, and then it's kind of caused it to increase. Anxiety, depression, stress, and other issues resulting from that. So it has really been on the rise, and I would say there's a lot of people. The demand for services has really been up recently, and it continues to rise.
You mentioned three things there: anxiety, stress, and depression. Mm-hmm. How similar are they and how different are they?
Well, you can have people that already kind of suffer from anxiety and depression and stress, and it's pretty, normal to have those things. Really, the difference in them is how people manage or cope with them, because life in general is going to cause some anxiety, some depression, and some stress. People cope differently. Some people know how to manage better than others. But then if you take that you already normally have these issues, and then you add the pandemic to it that causes a lot of isolation, for you not to be able to be around family and friends during the time when it's most needed during the grief process, then it's exacerbated. And so it causes it to rise and increase, and for those emotions and that mixture to get kind of out of control.
I was interested that you mentioned that, because in some of the information and research, people are saying that mental illness might sound like a negative term, but it's a real condition that you said, as well as what they're saying, it can be managed if you can identify. So what should be the first step if someone's going through, they're feeling this anxiety and they're depressed about some of the loved ones that they're missing now, especially that it can be amplified with the holidays. So what should the first step be for them?
The first step would be to, first of all, acknowledge, identify, recognize the feelings that you're having, and try to reach out to someone. And you can reach out to, other family, friends, people that you're close to. Some people reach out based on their, faith or belief system. They reach out to spiritual organizations, and try and cope with it that way, and kind of go through the process, because grief is a normal process, and it's going to take a healing process to get through it. And so when you start exhibiting signs where you see that maybe it's getting out of control and you're not able to handle it, that's when you would probably reach out to a mental health professional to get additional assistance and help to kind of help you through that process.
When you look for someone to share this with, that let's say not a professional counselor, but a friend or family, is there a way you should look for a certain type of individual?
Not necessarily. You really are not going to know until you reach out to that person. The one thing about grief is it's kind of awkward for a lot of people. People don't know how to approach a person that's grieving. Sometimes they may say the wrong things, or things that they think are appropriate to say, because they don't really know what to say. And so sometimes you're going to experience some of that with people. Some people, instead of moving towards that person to help them cope, they may isolate because they feel uncomfortable in those type of situations. And so sometimes you just may not know until you actually reach out to the person. But the best thing is for you to actually tell them what you need. You can tell them, hey, I don't need advice, I just need support. I just need an ear for you to listen to me, or I need somebody to just talk about, my loss with. And so you can definitely tell the person exactly what you need, and that's really the best way, is to tell them what you need, and then they know exactly what to provide you with.
So when you look at the next step of going to a professional licensed counselor, or someone who provides that type of therapeutic services, such as you and your company, how do you decide, okay, well, I really think I need to make the next step? How do you make that decision?
Some people go through family and friends. They have, people that they know that are already in counseling, so they may reach out to them and see if they have any possible list of mental health professionals that they're aware of. You can also go online. There's a lot of sites online that list local therapists that you can look into, and a lot of times we list like our bios, where we list if we're experienced or we specialize in a certain area, so you can look and see if they specialize in grief. They don't have to, but you can look if that's one of the areas of expertise for them. And then there's always where you can also also just kind of look through your local resources, basically, again, online, offline, and kind of ask around. And a lot of times people know somebody who knows somebody. And so, and then there's always where you can reach out to, like me, I'm available, and I can direct you in a certain path, so I can give, information and kind of point you in the right direction.
Take about 40 seconds and share directly to our viewers this morning if they feel like they might be somebody who needs to take this step as they approach the holiday season. Give them a couple of words of encouragement.
Okay, a couple words of encouragement is, first of all, realize that you are not alone. You're not alone in this. A lot of people have experienced grief. A lot of people experience it throughout the year. And so know that this is a normal process for you to be going through, for you to be feeling the way that you're feeling. It may feel like it's a roller coaster of emotions, but there is a support system available, whether it's close family, friends, people that you are in close contact with, or mental health professional help. So know that you don't have to go through the process alone, and you can get through this process with the support of someone.
Shantay Jenkins, we thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing your expertise, and I'm sure it's going to be beneficial to those watching this morning who may need that service. Thank you so much today.
Thank you.
Our guest now, Dr. Mark Wyatt, PhD, and we're talking about grief and understanding what a lot of people, Dr. Wyatt, are going through this time of the year due to what's happened the last almost 2 years with the pandemic, losing loved ones who won't be here this year for the first time to share the holidays, and of course a major change when we look at the amount of lives that we've lost in both the state of Alabama and in Mobile County. In fact, nearly 1,400 people that we've lost here in Mobile County alone. Give us an idea how you've been able to, in the last year and a half, working with families who are in the process of losing a loved one and those who have lost a loved one. How has it been different for you in the last year and a half?
It has, Eric. I, as a hospice chaplain and bereavement coordinator, grief is the emotional response to a loss, and bereavement is the outward expression of that. And what's happened is there's normal grief, but there's also something called complicated grief, where there are one or more risk factors along with what we normally experience as grief when we lose something or someone. And then there's also disenfranchised grief, which is grief that we don't feel like society recognizes our right to grieve. So if someone loses an ex-spouse or a same-sex partner or something and they feel disenfranchised, that makes it more complicated. So complicated grief might be, for instance, a parent that loses a child, but it can also be grief like we've seen during pandemic, where someone is not able to be there with their loved one when they pass. And so that complicates their grief process. And they don't even know they're going through grief very often when they're doing that. And a lot of times people just they just don't know how to start that bereavement process, and they need a little help moving through it.
Now, you talk about both the process as well as the different types. So once you recognize it, you then start to take them through a process for that particular type of grief?
Yeah, Eric, everybody grieves differently. And so we have to allow people to grieve naturally and appropriately, and some people need more help than others. So yeah, we just, part of it, as Ms. Jenkins was saying, part of it, they just need to talk. One of the hardest parts about bereavement is about after someone passes, when the memorial service is done and everybody goes back to their lives, and we've still got a hole in ours. And one of the things that I find is it's very common for people to feel like that all of a sudden nobody wants to hear them talk about their loss anymore. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, it's natural and people want to hear it, but then we start to close down, as Ms. Jenkins was saying, we start to isolate because we think, well, everybody's tired of hearing about it. And they may not be, but we close down. And so part of grief counseling, part of bereavement counseling is giving people an open space to be able to continue to talk about their loved one, to say their name. It's very healthy to say their name and to have other people continue to talk about them and say their name without feeling like they're reminding you that they're gone. You know, a lot of times, as Ms. Jenkins was saying, people don't know what to say. They're afraid that if they bring up your loss, they're reminding you you've lost them, but that's actually not possible. And so it is healthy to be able to approach someone and talk to them and give them an opportunity just to talk their way through it.
Now, you also talked about there being stages.
Yes.
Give us an idea of how we realize that and how, of course, you were able to analyze that when you start providing this counseling to the family or to an individual.
In the 70s, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book and did some research about what we used to call the 5 stages of grief. There's denial, this can't be happening to me, anger, you know, what did I do to deserve this? Bargaining, what can I do to keep this from happening? And then depression, and then ultimately acceptance. And now they've added a 6th, which is meaning, attaching meaning to that loss or to that life. Now we talk about it more as a grief process, because you don't just move from one stage to the other and then you're done with it.
Right.
People need to know they can feel all of those things in a space of 5 minutes, and they can feel it a dozen times a day. It goes back and forth, and there's no time limit to grief. So when anyone says you should be over this by now, they haven't grieved recently, because there's no way to. So there are stages through it, but also, again, it's a process whereby we understand that those feelings are going to come. They're hardwired into us. I had one say to me recently, had someone say, well, I know that we're not supposed to grieve, you know, it's wrong for us to grieve. And honestly, I tell people all the time, grief is completely natural. Grief is the price of admission for loving someone. If you love somebody and you've been loved by them, you will grieve their loss. That's hardwired into us. Now, we can grieve well and we can grieve healthily, but grief is part of life. It just shows that you were loved and you loved them. So we need to allow those feelings to come on us, knowing that none of them are going to be permanent. Someone told me after a loss of my own, they said, you know, grief is or a loss is like a boulder dropped into the ocean, and the waves of grief are larger closer to the event. The further away from the event you get, the waves get smaller, but they never stop. The waves are there. And one of the problems, Eric, is that people have had losses that they've been grieving during this pandemic that they never recognized as loss. They've lost normalcy, they've lost interaction, they've lost jobs, they've lost routines, and they have been grieving those losses, but not recognizing that emotional process that they've been going through as grief, and relating it to going through grief because they didn't feel like that qualified as a real loss.
Now, we've got about a minute and a half here. Tell me, for those who are in this situation with the pandemic or even other challenges where their loved one, it's very little hope that they're going to turn around, and we're going through the hospice process of basically saying goodbye. What's the challenge of dealing with that as you're going through grief before the loss of them, because you know what's prevalent and what's, is going to happen?
Excellent question. In fact, those 5 stages of grief, actually, when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote that, it was in context of what people feel, what they go through when they learn they've got a terminal illness. So it wasn't really about having lost someone, it's what we feel when we know that we're going to lose either our life or someone else's life. And so if we understand that the things we're feeling are natural and normal, and we have to let ourselves feel them, that helps us move out of denial into acceptance. And through all those things, you're going to feel angry, you're going to feel depressed and sad, you're going to feel anxious, you're going to want to try to do things to fix it. And so just knowing that it's coming, but that none of those feelings will last forever, and you will move into a place of healing and celebration eventually over the one that you're going to lose, and that helps their passing. It takes that what we call spiritual distress off of their shoulders and gives them permission to go whenever it's their time.
So as we close out our interview this morning, take just a couple of time goes by so fast, but take about 15-20 seconds to leave a word with someone who's watching today who definitely is in this process that we're talking about.
I would say that if you are going through grief or bereavement, or if you recognize that you might be, don't be afraid to talk about it. As Ms. Jenkins was saying, find someone. Look for online support groups and grief and bereavement groups, things that you can get. There may be Facebook groups that will give you an outlet to be able to express your grief with someone who's likely to say, yes, I get that. And also let people come alongside you. And I would say if you know someone who's grieving a little bit, then yes, we don't say, let me know if I can help you, because they don't know how you can help. So offer your help in practical ways, but just let them know that you're there and you want to listen anytime.
Dr. Mark Wyatt, we thank you so much today for coming and sharing and being a blessing to our viewers today, and we look forward to hopefully this has been a blessing to them as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For more information on grief counseling amid the COVID-19 pandemic, you can call our two guests at the phone numbers you see there on the screen. Dr. Wyatt works at Southern Care Hospice Mobile. The website is southerncarehospice.com. Shantay Jenkins is also a mental health therapist at Sabree Therapeutic Services, which has offices in Montgomery and in Mobile. The website is sabreets.com, and you can see there the phone number as well, where she can be reached there on your TV screen. Well, coming up on Perspectives, we talk with Mobile Mayor Sandy Stimpson. Elected to a third term, Mayor Stimpson has plans now for a busy and productive first 100 days. He's calling it Uniting Mobile Through Action. The ambitious plan will move several major goals and projects forward to continue what the mayor calls a transformation of the port city. There are 7 focus areas for his third term, which will address public safety, infrastructure, the growth of the city, the economy, tourism, and resiliency. Now we hear from Mayor Sandy Stimpson on his plan for Mobile's progress over the coming months. Well, please join us here next Saturday morning for Perspectives as we discuss important issues and seek solutions. If you have any ideas of topics you'd like for us to discuss, just drop it to us here at Perspectives, fox10tv.com. I'm Eric Reynolds. Have a great holiday and week ahead.
Thanks for watching Fox 10 News. Watch us live wherever you are, on our mobile, our streaming news app, and you can also watch us on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV.